I'm Matt Ellman, and you're listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast. We've got lots of useful tips and tricks to help you plan your school year as you prepare your learners for their Cambridge English qualifications. Whether you've been teaching exam classes for years or just at the start of your teaching career, come along with us. We'll help you unpack the English language exam journey using our own real-life experience and easy-to-follow examples from the exam preparation course Complete. So, let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by me, Matt Ellman. I'm the Professional Learning and Development Manager at Cambridge, designing and delivering training for teachers, institutions and ministries of education around the world. I've worked as a teacher and trainer in the UK, Spain and Malaysia, and I've delivered courses, workshops and talks in around 30 countries. Hello and welcome to my first podcast in this series on B2 First for Schools. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about promoting autonomy in your learners, learner autonomy. This is all about your learners understanding what they need to do to take their skills further, what habits they need to develop, what skills they need to work on, but also understanding what their strengths are. And it's a valuable skill, not just for English, but for life in general. Lifelong learning is now something that education systems around the world are focusing on. It's really important to develop this in all of our learners. And it's essential particularly at this level because learners are trying to take themselves from that intermediate stage, from B1, B1 plus, up to B2 and hopefully beyond. And we'll see that this can be a tricky period. This can be a tricky stage for learners to get past. The good news is that students usually have a basis of learning skills and learning strategies and good habits by this point. So there's something to work with. So we'll break this down into three areas. We'll start with setting goals and visualizing success. Then we'll talk about habits, putting habits in place. And finally, we'll talk about how learner autonomy fits in with the exam journey and your students' long-term success. So setting goals, first of all, it's really important, probably when you're learning anything, not just English, to understand your endpoint and understand where you're trying to get to. And that's especially true when it comes to language learning and learning for an exam like B2 First for Schools. I think that learners often have the misapprehension that they need to speak perfect English, that to do well in the exam, they need to be completely proficient. They have to speak and write with no mistakes. And that's obviously not true. So it's really important for us to highlight for them what the desired endpoint is, so that they know what they're aiming for, but also to give them confidence so that they understand that they don't need to be absolutely perfect. So one of the best resources for doing this is the Cambridge English website, cambridgeenglish.org. And there are two great resources. One is the handbook, the B2 First for Schools handbook, which is freely downloadable. And in the handbook, you've got examples of the writing tasks and examples of actual writing from real students so that students can see what they're supposed to be producing. And they can see the grades that those writing tasks were given as well. There are videos on the Cambridge English website, and these show real speaking exams. You see the examiner, you see the candidates sitting there taking their exam. And this is a great way of highlighting to your students what the speaking exam involves and showing that it's not, it's a big, frightening, scary experience, but it's actually quite conversational, and of highlighting the fact that they don't need to speak absolutely perfect English. As with all Cambridge exams, the emphasis is on successful communication. And your students will generally be surprised, I think, when they see these exams and see the grades that those candidates get. They'll be surprised at how high you can score, even though your English is not completely perfect. So that's a great way of helping your students understand what success looks like in the speaking exam. Once they've done that, we can take this a step further and we can have our students visualizing themselves being successful in the exam. This is a little bit like setting goals, and often we ask our students to write goals, or we might have learning outcomes and desired goals written for ourselves in our lesson plans or in the pages of our course book. But visualizing it takes it one step further because it's about really seeing yourself and sort of like physically experiencing yourself in the exam doing really well. This is a proven strategy for success in many fields, and it's something that professional sports people use quite often, that they kind of visualize themselves on the day of their match, doing really well, performing everything as they want to perform it. So we can take that same idea and have our students do that in the classroom, closing their eyes, seeing themselves, walking to the exam room, greeting the examiner, sitting down, and then doing really well in the exam. For your students who find that difficult, you can actually have them role-playing it. So you can take the exam script, and you'll find this in the B2 First for Schools handbook. You can take that speaking exam script and have your students use that as the basis for a simple role-play. And that role-play, because the exam starts with those kind of personal questions about you and your family and your hobbies, it's a great way to kick off your course and have your students get to know each other a little bit better. So setting goals and visualizing success is a great way to begin this process of developing learner autonomy, and it's also a great way to kick off your exam course. The second area is all about habits and having your students work out for themselves which habits are going to be the most useful to them as they prepare for their exam. The best way to do this is to start with the habits that they've already got and ask your learners to share between themselves what language learning habits they already use, because those are the habits that have been successful for them up to this point, up to B1, B1+. It's also a good idea, I think, for them to think about the habits that may be negative. What habits kind of get in the way? Things like having their phone on the desk when they're studying. Does this kind of get in the way and distract them? And how can they minimize those negative habits? This process is all about your learners kind of reflecting on their study habits and reflecting on what's going to work best for them, because it will be different for every student. And your role as the teacher is to kind of feed in useful ideas. And many of the things that will be useful are ideas that you're already familiar with. So we know, for example, that students who read a lot more inevitably do much better, not just in exams, but in language learning generally. So one useful habit might be to have your students make sure that they're reading a little bit in English every day. Another useful habit might be to put on subtitles when they're watching things on YouTube or Netflix or whatever, so that they're getting a little bit of English. It might be turning the language on their mobile phone to English, so that they just have that constant reinforcement of English every time they look at their phone. But it's a very personal thing, and it should be a personal thing. The important aspect is to have this happening at the start of the exam journey, because it's obviously too late. Once you get closer to the exam, it's much too late to start reading every day. You need to be doing it from the beginning. And don't forget about your own habits as a teacher. This is something that we can model for our students ourselves by thinking about what we do as teachers and as language learners ourselves, and feeding that into the conversation too. All right, and then the final element of this idea of learner autonomy is how it feeds in to the idea of our exam journey, of taking our students from the very beginning of their exam course right to the end, to exam day and success on exam day. But not just that, it's also about how they develop as language learners. So Cambridge English qualifications are all designed to further your students' abilities as language learners. It's not just about getting that piece of paper, it's really about taking them to mastery of English step by step. And it's really important to realize, I think, that the exam is training your learners. So to give you an example of how you might apply this idea of the growth mindset in your classes, think about the types of ways that you respond to your learners when they contribute during the lesson. I'm looking at Complete B2 First for Schools right now, and I'm on Unit 10, page 107. And there's an exercise here, which is the open-close task from the Reading and Use of English paper. When we respond to their contributions, often we're saying, yep, great, you got the right answer, or we're saying no. It's a yes, no, good, bad kind of thing. And what we want to do is encourage learners for the effort that they've made and explore how they've arrived at that answer, even if it's wrong, and to praise that exploration, because that's what's going to get them the correct answer eventually. That's the behavior that we want to encourage. What we don't want to do is say, yes, great, and give them a real pat on the back for the right answers, but then, maybe make them feel less successful when they've got the wrong answer, because we want to encourage the effort as much as the achievement. Let's recap. So let's just look back at what we've discussed here. We've been looking at the idea of promoting learner autonomy, the idea of helping our learners take control of their own learning and understand themselves what they need to do to get themselves to the next level. We've talked about setting goals and the importance of being able to visualize success. We've talked about how your learners can put good habits in place and minimize the negative habits that might be holding them back. And we've talked about the benefits of this for the exam journey and how it's not just going to take them towards success on exam day, but also further success as they move beyond B2 First for Schools. That's it for today. Discover more episodes from this series on our website, cambridge.org/completeconfidence. We have podcast episodes for every level of the Cambridge exams. Come back and join us again soon. And don't worry, you've got this.
You've been listening to the Complete Confidence with Cambridge podcast, brought to you by Cambridge University Press and Assessment.